And so the whole premise is a shell game of look over here, use over there. And it's absolutely laughable in terms of the healthcare that's available, not just for our veterans, but also for all of the people who live in Southern Chester County, as an example. I stand here as a veteran of the United States Air Force and as a woman who raised her hand and swore that oath and wore that uniform. Something very deeply troubling is happening in our armed forces. It's a systematic, intentional, and harmful rollback of women's roles and recognition in our military. And we simply cannot be silent. Rolling back access to combat and leadership positions doesn't just hurt women, it undercuts military readiness. We owe it to every young girl who dreams of service to be able to ensure that history remembers every servicewoman's contribution and her sacrifices as well. So today, let me be clear, I will not allow the erasure of women in service. I will not accept the rollback of rights, roles, or recognition for those women who have served. And I will not rest until every servicewoman is treated with dignity and equity and with respect. I thank each of you here who is standing behind me and in defense of servicewomen in our past, our present, and our future.
Representative Houlahan and Representative Ramirez offered an amendment, Mr. Speaker, that exempts individuals with disabilities from having to prove eligibility for Medicaid every 6 months. That's a burdensome red tape requirement designed to throw people off of Medicaid who are eligible. That amendment was dismissed. Mr. Speaker, as you know, by House Republicans.
Gentleman from Massachusetts. Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlahan, for the purpose of a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to amend the rule to make in order the amendment at the desk that protects against any cuts to Medicaid and SNAP.
Gentlelady from North Carolina has not yielded for that purpose, and therefore the unanimous consent request cannot be entertained. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker.
Well, we are about 17 hours into a federal government shutdown with no end in sight. Congress has been at odds over enhanced Obamacare subsidies. Democrats want to extend COVID-era tax credits in an effort to reverse Medicaid changes brought about by President Trump's big, beautiful bill. But Republicans say the subsidies were meant to be temporary. Republican Dan Muser spoke with Newsmax today.
If it weren't the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, they would have come up with something else. But the ACA issue doesn't need to be addressed now.
And Democrat Chrissy Houlahan released a video statement on social media.
Republicans have completely disregarded bipartisanship, and they're playing a dangerous game with people's health care. Well, the Republican shutdown has started. Republicans have completely disregarded bipartisanship, and they're playing a dangerous game with people's health care. If Republicans get their way, healthcare premiums in our district could rise by $3,000 per person. They will say some pretty outlandish things to get you to believe that this is not their fault. But remember, they control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They can end this at any time. I am ranked as one of the most bipartisan members of the House, and I know that lasting legislation requires compromise. So I really don't say this lightly. The federal government has shut down because of Republican mismanagement. They have refused to work with Democrats to pass a responsible budget. I understand how stressful and uncertain this time will be for you and your family. Please know that my team and I are here to support you however we can. We will keep updating you as we learn more. The Constitution is not a buffet.
You don't get to pick and choose what you like and ignore the rest. The Constitution is absolute. It is binding, and it is our sworn duty to protect and defend it.
Secretary Hegseth and I have had this conversation in person, face to face before. I've challenged him to explain what he means by standards and whether or not that means that women would be excluded from different positions.
Would it be fair to say that both men and women are, generally speaking, capable of causing death?
It depends.
Yes or no, sir?
Depends on the
Yes
context.
or no? Yes or no? Are men and women capable of causing death?
It depends on the context.
Yes or no? It's unbelievable to me that you can't come up with an answer whether or not a man or a woman can cause death. That's an obvious yes.
You're on the Armed Services Committee. Part of your job is oversight of the U.S. military. What do you think of that?
It's horrifying, and it should send chills down to the spines of every American. This is not the way that our U.S. military is supposed to be used. It's designed to be used in our own cities against our own citizens. And that should not be anything that anyone should tolerate, regardless of their party.
This administration has recklessly and dangerously deployed the National Guard to American cities without the request or permission of either state or local officials. It's divisive, shameful, and irresponsible for us to ask our soldiers to act as local police officers, a role that undermines our readiness for actual conflicts. And it is most certainly divisive, shameful, and irresponsible when we force them to spend their days picking up trash at a cost of billions to the taxpayer.
And at the end of his riff, he said, if the words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign. These are to the highest ranking military officials in the nation.
You know, I grew up in a military family, and my father would always tell me that you can't serve outside. You can't solve from the outside what is going on the inside. And so if the challenge was get out, then I would say to those generals, stay put, because we need you. We need you and your experience to counter the message of Mr. Hegseth and, frankly, the president himself as well.
We swore an oath, not to a party and not to a president, but to that Constitution, to that document, and to the people that we serve, even those who oppose us and even those who dislike us. And if we collectively keep smashing the foundations of this, our democracy, for short-term political gain, there won't be anything left for all of us to stand on.
I mean, some of the backstory here is that President Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act was an effort paused right now by a Trump-appointed judge to get around some of the due process obligations when it comes to deporting undocumented immigrants in this country. But anyway.
I mean, your head should explode when you hear the president of the United States say that he's not really sure if he's going to abide by the Constitution, and then say something as weak as that he's not a lawyer. It doesn't matter what he is. He's the president of the United States. And the idea that he can seriously, with a straight face, say something like that should offend all Americans, should offend all voters, and should be an indicator of who he is as a person. And I think one of the things we were talking about earlier was sort of a legislative responsibility. The reality is right now, it's not just the president who's behaving as though the Constitution doesn't matter. So is the legislature. We every week, week after week, are passing less than 5 or 6 bills, and they're ridiculous bills that mean nothing. We have so far had 5 laws come into being as a result of the last 100 days. We are anemic as a legislative body, and we refuse to actually do our constitutional job, which is to do the things like tariff policy. Instead of doing that, my Republican colleagues have literally voted on the ability to not vote on tariffs. And that's where we are right now as a legislature.
All right, thanks one and all for being here. Really appreciate it.
So I'll tell you a story about my VA, which is in Coatesville. For coming. Sorry to be a little bit late. Thank you. Is this thing on? I think it is. Thank you so much to my panel for joining us today. And thank you so much to all of you all for joining us on a Thursday night when you have probably other things you could be doing with your time. This is our 102nd town hall. And I think specifically I've been in this place before as well. And we have the opportunity to bring a bunch of local experts today to help us understand what's going on in the government. Some of you asked me what's going on in the government. And particularly today, we're going to be focused on something called the Big Beautiful Bill. So importantly, this town hall was scheduled before the government shut down. But a lot of what's going on with the Big Beautiful Bill has a lot to do with why the government is shutting down. And so I think it'll be instructive to go kind of back and forth with what's happening in the government right now and why it's happening and how it relates to this Big Beautiful Bill. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. To remind people again, this is our 102nd town hall. We are really grateful to have you here. This town hall will be a little bit longer than normal. It'll be an hour and a half to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. I'll provide a legislative update, and my guess is that I will hopefully answer many of the questions that you have during that legislative update, so that maybe you won't have to ask all the questions on the back end. But if you still have a burning question and you'd like to ask it, please make sure that you put it on the card, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. We're then going to transition into a fireside chat, which we don't have a fire, nor are we going to sit around it. But this is an opportunity to hear from some local experts on some of the aspects of the Big Beautiful Bill and how they're going to affect our community specifically. Lastly, we will turn to those questions and answers, and we will have the opportunity to answer your questions and be guided by Chris Aiello, who's from the United Way of Chester County. He's going to be our moderator. For those of you who have been to other town halls before, we usually have a moderator from our community. His job or her job is to take the cards and order them so that we don't have 10 questions on the same thing, that we instead consolidate them into one so that we can get to as many questions as possible. Then we'll have some closing remarks, and then we will let you out to your world, to the world at 7:30, hopefully, so an hour and a half from now. Next slide, please. So as is usual, I tell people who have been to our town halls that I took a page out of having been a high school chemistry teacher for this one. It's really important in this time where we are all so anxious and we are all so divided and we are all so heartbroken for various different reasons, that we treat each other with respect. This is a classroom management technique, for lack of a better word. It's something that we do in office settings too, where we set the norms, where we talk to each other before we start a meeting and talk about how we're going to interact with each other. We're in a world right now where these kinds of meetings can get really hot and can get really contentious, but I'm really certain that what we largely want is information, and we want to share our opinions. And so we're trying really hard to maintain decorum, to maintain civility and decency, and to address any conflict that we have in a civil and decent way. The other thing that we're trying really hard to do is this is what's called an official meeting. I am here in my official capacity as your member of Congress. This is not a campaign meeting. This is not about the candidates that are running or the next election or the ones thereafter. This is just about what's going on in government right now. So we want to make sure that we're talking about policies and not politics as much as is possible. I'm going to be honest, this is going to be hard for me this time because there's a lot of politics wrapped up into what's going on in Washington right now. So I will do my best to tell it as it is, as I see it, but I recognize that not everyone will share my opinions. Next slide, please. So now we're moving to the card that you probably have on your seat. This is where you have an opportunity to practice your handwriting and make sure that we can read your name and your address and your information so that we make sure that we're able to respond to you if we're not able to get to you here in this setting. We also want to know kind of what brought you here. And on the back, if you have the opportunity to fill out a question, please do so. In the back are many members of my team who will be collecting cards and be giving them to Chris to moderate. And we will move on to that kind of at the 7 o'clock timeframe. Next slide, please. So as promised, we are here to talk about something called the Big Beautiful Bill, also referred to as the Republican budget. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about what happened a day or so ago and the government shutdown. So in many ways, the shutting down of this government started in January. And so it didn't necessarily start a day ago. It began in January with DOGE, seems like a long time ago, with NIH, with CDC, with the VA, with the Department of Education, with the Social Security Office. All of these organizations, pretty much everything you could name in the federal government, being attacked, and having people let go, fired, brought back, fired again, all of those kinds of things. And so it created a standoff that we've had now ongoing for the last 9 months. And what we're seeing in Washington sort of kicked into overdrive in this latest round of the government shutdown. And I'll go into more about that. But largely, the pieces of this fight came into form July 4th when the big, beautiful bill was passed. So I'll turn the page now, or next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about what I expect will be the consequences of the government shutting down, or as long as it shuts down. I was sworn into a shutdown government in 2019. The very first day I raised my hand and took the oath was a shuttered government, and we were shut for more than 30 days that time. It was the longest shutdown in modern history. I hope that this will not last that long. But if history is past as prologue, what we will see is that the Social Security Office checks will continue, but new applications may be slow. If you haven't already seen, new applications and the Social Security Office is already considerably slower than it was before this election. Medicare and Medicaid and SNAP benefits will thankfully continue. The WIC programs, food programs will only operate at the state and local level, and it may vary by location. For our military men and women in uniform and for our veterans, I think many of you who are veterans who are in this audience may have received a really alarming email talking about why the government was shut down. But the general message is that most benefits will continue, although again, some regional offices will be closed. The Postal Service will continue. I was just there today. Next slide, please. In terms of travel, your TSA officers will be working, and as will the traffic controllers, but they will not be being paid for their work. The student loans and Pell Grants will continue to be funded, but they may end earlier if the shutdown is prolonged too long. Immigration courts will continue. In fact, I've spoke to somebody today who's going in for their hearing. And federal agencies, many of them will be furloughed, and that means that they will be let go without pay, depending on what status they're in. And some will be put on leave, but they will get their pay back when they come back. And some, as I've mentioned, will continue to have to work, but without pay. So as an example, my office, I've deemed them all critical personnel. They are all working. They are all not being paid for the work that they are working. Thankfully, last time the government shut down, we passed a piece of legislation that said that they will be able to recover that money after they return to work, after we open the government. Next slide, please. So that's kind of what I think is going to happen because of the government shutdown. And let's now get into the meat of what we originally had this meeting scheduled to talk about, which is the Republican budget. So this law was passed July 4th in a flurry. It was 1,000 pages long and was introduced with very little time for anyone on both sides of the aisle to read it. It was a fast track process called reconciliation. And I'll go into a little bit more of detail of what reconciliation is because it matters to why we are here now. This budget shifts a lot of costs onto our families, onto our states and our state governments, and to our local governments and our local communities. What is reconciliation? It's a little bit wonky, but importantly, when the one party has the House, the Senate, and the White House, they have this superpower that's called reconciliation, and they can typically do it twice within a 2-year period. The Republicans have the trifecta right now. Democrats had it when I was in office, and we did something similar, but with a different kind of a bill with different purpose. And so what happens is with the reconciliation, you don't need the 2/3 vote that you normally would need to pass one big piece of legislation that only is about a budget. It can't have anything to do with anything that doesn't touch dollars, doesn't get dollars or give dollars. So this reconciliation package, the big, beautiful bill or the Republican budget is what was passed. I very much believe that budgets are a reflection of our values. And so this is an opportunity for me to tell you a little bit about the values of this particular piece of legislation. Next slide. I serve in a community that is 40% Republican, 40% Democrat, and 20% independent. So I'll go over that again. This community is 40% Republican, 40% Democrat, and 20% independent. We are a purple place. And so we have lots and lots of different opinions and things and ways to see things. Every time that I vote for something, I have to try to put on every hat that I can to try to think of how my whole community might think about it and whether it passes the test to vote yes or the test to vote no. In this particular case, I voted no against this bill. But what I would tell you is that there are some good things in this bill, and here are some of them for our community. One is our community is one of the few communities in Pennsylvania and in the country that benefit from the state and local tax benefit. Our housing here is very, very expensive. And in the 2016 bill that penalized those of us who have more expensive houses and took back some of our tax benefits, a lot of people in New Jersey and in California and in New York were really upset with that. And as a consequence, some of this was rolled back in this most recent bill. So that is to the benefit of those of us who live in houses that are more expensive and those of us who earn less than $500,000. The deduction was raised from $10,000 to $40,000. And so that's a good benefit for this part of the country. It did eliminate taxes on tips, but importantly, it only eliminated it on the first $25,000. I want to say that again because the rumor that it is on all tips is untrue. It's great that the first $25,000 of tips are not taxed, but that's not enough to live on, as we all know. And as I recall, it's not permanent. It also made the $2,000 child tax credit for individuals permanent. And this is a good thing. This is something that all of us have been fighting for. Frankly, Democrats have been fighting for child tax credits for a very long time. And this is very helpful for those of us who care for families. It also made the tax credit to employers who provide a paid family leave credit permanent. And that's good too. I work a lot on paid leave. This is something that's one of my passion projects. We are one of only 7 countries that doesn't have a paid leave program. And one of the levers that we can pull is on taxes and tax benefits. And so I'm pleased to see that this one lever was pulled. We have a lot more work to do. But those are some good things that are in the bill. Next slide, please. But here's the truth. A lot of what's in this bill is deceptive because a lot of the changes in the bill will happen both immediately and then over a long term of several years and then into the distant future. And so we have to be aware of all of those kinds of things when we think about, is this bill good for us or not? So as an example, right away, the Trump tax cuts kicked in for businesses and for billionaires. Right away, immediately, the most painful and damaging parts of this budget affected the billionaires positively and the businesses positively. That timing was obviously intentional. As intentional as it was that many of the bad things, like taking away Medicare from people, will kick in after the election. After the midterm election, people will start losing their Medicare, and they'll wonder, why did that happen? It happened because of a bill that was passed in July. Also, many of the things for Medicare, and we'll go into more detail about that, will kick in distant years from now. We'll go into the next slide. And this is where the two worlds collide. This is why our government is shutting down and why this big, beautiful bill or Republican budget is so difficult and toxic. And these are why they are related to one another. Because the biggest part of this bill, the most damaging part of this bill, is all of the things that it will do to all of us who have healthcare issues. And that is all of us. We all have healthcare issues. The biggest cuts to Medicaid in history will be part of this bill. It will take time for those Medicaid cuts to kick in, but millions of people will be losing their health insurance over time. The way they've done this is a very cynical way. It's by adding additional red tape, making it harder for people to be able to be eligible for these by having them apply twice a year rather than once a year, or not permanently, but having to continue to apply. And those things are very, very hard. And I will tell you, as a veteran, one of the things I get so angry at my colleagues about is some of the programs we try to roll out for veterans. The way Washington keeps the cost down is to try to make it hard for a vet to prove that they're eligible for it. And that's exactly what's happening here with Medicaid and Medicare. The other issue and why this is a pitched battle right now in Washington is that there's another part to this where the Affordable Care tax credits, the Affordable Care tax benefits will end on the January 1st of this year. And so this is why there's this clash of the titans right now, because we only have another few weeks before the end of the year to fight about all of our healthcare. If those of you guys who are on the exchange, your pricing will go up significantly if we don't have this battle right now. And what my Republican colleagues are saying is just vote for the continuing resolution. We'll have that discussion over the next 6 weeks. At this point in time, I don't trust them. Lots and lots of different reasons. The other thing that will happen and has happened already is that rural hospitals are going to be closing. We've already seen this happening in our community with Southern Chester County losing a couple and thankfully gaining one as well. But this is not the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of a trend. And we will be losing more and more rural hospitals as well. So this is part of the reason why the big, beautiful bill or the Republican budget and the government shutdown are so inextricably bound together. This is a fight about healthcare. Okay, next slide, please. One thing I do want to, I'm sorry, call attention to, but now that I look at it, it's hard for you. In the lower left corner of all my slides, and these will be available online, is my source. So if you want to know where did I get my data from, those of you guys who are teachers, there's what I got my data from. So you can take a look at that. In Pennsylvania 6, in the Pennsylvania 6, I'll talk to you a little bit about what's going on here. But one of the things that I'm very frustrated by my colleagues about is that there's a lot of narrative out there that this is not about taking people off of Medicaid. Able-bodied people who are working are the only ones who are going to be affected by that. And I can tell you emphatically that that is not true. Another narrative is, oh, well, we're just trying to prevent illegal immigrants from having Medicaid. They can't have Medicaid. If you don't have a Social Security card, you don't get Medicaid. So this is a false narrative too, and a false flag. So I will tell you personally, I have a very close relative of mine who is a grown adult on the spectrum. And if he has to apply twice a year for Medicaid, it will be almost impossible for him to fill in all of those forms. And I'm really worried about whether or not that's something that he will do and can do, as well as demonstrate that he's trying to find a job. Next slide, please. So as you can see, it's a little bit small, but this is a timeline of why this battle is happening now. So July 4th, you see that the Medicare savings programs ended because of the passage of this bill. So 445,000 Pennsylvanians at that point in time lost help paying for Medicare on the minute the bill was signed. As I mentioned, the Affordable Care tax credits will be ending on January 1st. So that will be another tranche of big expenses for people to experience. In some cases, thousands of dollars are anticipated. The Medicaid work requirements that I was just talking about will start, and it's estimated that over 100,000 people in Pennsylvania 6 in our district will experience that sort of problem and face more red tape. Remember, this district is 700,000 people. So if 100,000 people are possibly affected by that, that's a lot of people. Medicaid cost sharing requirements will also start. And this is something that is also about the state burden sharing too. And different states are going to have to figure out how they're going to manage that. And different people are going to have to figure out whether they can manage that. And all of the changes will be fully implemented by 2034. So this is a long tail on this piece of legislation. Next slide. So I really wanted to make sure I spent a lot of time, probably more than I should have, on why this battle is related to the closing of the government. And that's why you're hearing about healthcare. And you're hearing both sides say different things. And I'm trying to make sure that you understand this is absolutely about us. This is about anybody who has healthcare, whether it's on the exchange or whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or even if you have private insurance, your money is going to go less far because of all of these shocks to the system. But quickly, I will go through some of the other things that are going on in the big, beautiful bill or the Republican budget. Remember, I told you that budgets show your values. SNAP. SNAP is the program that helps feed our babies, our children. When I taught high school chemistry, 99% of my kids were on free and reduced lunch. And what's happening here is we're cutting 186 million of SNAP benefits out of the budget. That's 19,000 people in this district alone. And that means that $167 will not be available in their pockets on average. And nationwide, we think it's about 800,000 kids. And meanwhile, my husband is the one who does most of the grocery shopping. He has explained to me that the price of everything has gone up recently. So meanwhile, your dollar goes less far. Next slide, please. Again, to SNAP. This is not just about those kids and their families who are benefiting from the SNAP program. It's also about the farmers who also benefit from the SNAP program. We have a lot of dairy farmers here. We have a lot of mushroom farmers here. We have a lot of farm farmers here. And a lot of those folks are going to be losing the business that they typically do with SNAP, with the SNAP program. Specifically, we think that $103 million will be lost in Pennsylvania alone on dairy. We think that 22 million will be lost in Pennsylvania alone for mushrooms. Not only will this affect our farmers and our children, but it also has to come from somewhere. If we're going to replenish this money, where will it come from? It'll come from our state government. And as we know, our state government doesn't have additional money either. So we have to then, that's why you're seeing the problems in Harrisburg trying to figure out what to do with our state budget. They're waiting for Washington to figure out what to do. Next slide, please. So we've gone through healthcare, then we went through food scarcity. Now we're going to talk about the price of education. This bill, big, beautiful bill, BBB, the Republican budget, if you really value a family, if you really value people, then you really value education. And this went further to reduce the opportunities for people to get grants and loans for their education. So not only do parents have less access to grants, meaning they're capped at a certain level, but also the children, if they're getting those loans themselves, have caps on how much grants they can get. And their loan repayments are spiking as well. So if you really care about our families and if you really care about our workforce, then you really shouldn't mess with education. And that's what's happening. Next slide. Now I'm going to transition and I'm going to check for time. How am I doing? I'm doing okay. Yeah, I'm never doing okay. Now I'm going to transition a little bit for 5 or so slides, and there's only 6 or so left to go, 7 or so left to go, to the greater economy. So now we're moving out of the big, beautiful bill or the Republican budget, and we're saying this doesn't happen in a vacuum. This is overlaid into what's happening in our economy at large. And so this is a chart, and on this chart, you see on the left, it says lower, on the right, it says middle, and on the middle, it says middle, and on the far right, it says higher. And it's hard for you to see, but this x-axis is time. And what this is trying to demonstrate is the kind of income, the ability, your wage availability. How much money do you have? And what it's showing is that higher income people are having access to more money. Their money is going up. The power of their dollar and their income per capita is going up over time. And you're seeing most of us are going down over the last several months. And so what that's called is a K curve, because it kind of looks like a K. And so when you think about the power of our economy, I'll read you some statistics. Only 3% of Pennsylvania 6 is the one that's going up. So 3% of us are experiencing more income and more power to spend. 40% of us are making between 75 and 500,000. So that's the middle line. And the rest of us, 57% of us, are in the lower level. So most of us, 97%, my MIT math says, are experiencing having less money to spend than we did at the beginning of the year. So again, this is overlaying into the environment. It has nothing to do with the Republican budget, but everything to do with the fact that the economy is not getting better and we don't have more money than we did before. Next slide. Also not related to the Republican budget, but very related to what's going on. We have all experienced a lot of tariff shock over the last 9 months or so. This is a chart. On the left side, it says a bunch of different things like vehicle insurance and food costs or restaurant costs or maintenance of your car or electricity. And on the right side, what you're seeing is percentage increase or decrease. And the axis where the line is, where I'll look at food at home has gone up about 7.75, it looks like, as an example. So this is what's going on now as a result of the shocks to our country because of the tariff war that's ongoing. I think that tariffs are just a tax on people, and I think that it's been pretty poorly rolled out, even if it is something that's effective in the end. I had the opportunity to travel to India and to Pakistan and to China over the last several weeks, and I happened to be there when we were levying a 50% tax or tariff on India and a 19% tariff on Pakistan. You can bet that that created real problems in that part of the world. I happened to be there last week in China when we were trying to figure out what our tariff rate was in China. And you can bet India notices that China is getting a better tariff rate than they are. And that's a mess. That's a huge mess in terms of our national security. So this is all overlaying our cost of living and what we're experiencing. Last couple of slides here. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly here. Now we're dipping back into the big, beautiful bill. Now we're going back into some of the things that happened, a few positives that happened. Housing affordability is hugely difficult here in this area and across the country. Unfortunately, so far, we haven't really seen any dip in interest rates for mortgages, any real significant dip in interest rates or mortgages. So right now, if time goes on for as long as it's going to go on, we're going to continue to pay higher rates than we should. And hopefully those interest rates will go down. But in the meantime, some positives. They did have in the bill that families with fair housing allowance or VA loans can deduct the mortgage insurance. And so that's good. And they did have some increased funding for affordable housing. And we know that's really, really important, as particularly in our area. And that could help us with more low-income housing. So that's good. But in the meantime, small businesses and we all who have mortgages are paying a lot of money and hoping that the interest rates go down. Next slide. All right, last topic. Yep, last topic about the big, beautiful bill or the Republican budget is about energy. If you recall, back when Democrats had the House, we passed something called the ill-titled Inflation Reduction Act, which I thought was the dumbest name ever. But it actually had quite a lot of parts of the legislation that had to do with energy and had to do with making sure that we were energy independent and that we were able to meet the needs of our economy by ourselves without other countries. And that meant that we had a lot of ability to increase funding and investment into renewable energies. Unfortunately, the Inflation Reduction Act went on the cutting room floor as a result of the big, beautiful bill. A lot of the big, beautiful bill was undoing all of the funding that happened during the Inflation Reduction Act. In fact, today, if you look at the New York Times, you'll see a headline that $7.5 billion, several hundred projects have just been pulled back that have to do with renewable energies. You will see that you just saw that 18 billion in New York was taken back by President Trump for a lot of the work that's going on in the tunnels and bridges up in the New York and New Jersey area. So that has to do with this Build Back Big Beautiful Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, but it also has to do with one of the bigger problems that I have that's going on with the government closing down is this administration can't be trusted. Even if we can figure out a compromise, even if we can pass a bill together, they rescind all of the things that we agree on. And that is unconstitutional. That's literally my job, is the power of the purse. And if I go through this whole process of negotiating in good faith with my colleagues, and then the president, any president, no matter who the president is, undoes it, then that's something that makes it really hard for me to sit down at the table and try and find a deal. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, a lot of these things are chipping away at the possible progress that we were going to make. I want to make sure that you understand this isn't just about making sure that we're clean or that we're green, although that is really important and really, really wonderful. It is important that we have a lot more energy faster. We have quantum coming. We have AI coming. We have Bitcoin and crypto coming. All of these things are going to demand power that we don't have. And you can bet all those other countries that I have the opportunity to visit are figuring this out. China is way ahead on this to make sure that they can generate the energy that they need to do all of the data processing that they need to be able to not just manage their people and their air and all those kinds of things, but to be able to compete in this modern economy. And so by suffocating and draining all of these opportunities for renewable energies, we are suffocating ourselves. We're making it impossible for us to grow as a nation. I believe in an all of the above energy strategy. I believe that there is a use for all kinds of energy, but suffocating many of the different kinds this way will end up with us being vulnerable from a national security standpoint and vulnerable from a economic standpoint too. So yeah, September 30th, you probably know, or maybe you do, the EV tax credit ended, so you can't get a tax credit on buying an EV. Shortly, we'll have home energy credits ending as well. EV charger taxes credits will end in 2026, and then continually, killing off these clean energy projects. You've already seen many of them phased out too. Okay, so what we've just done with the time that we've had, and we're relatively on time, is we've gone through what's happening with the government, the shutdown. We've gone through why it's related to this big, beautiful bill or the Republican budget. And we've gone through why now? Why are the Democrats taking a stand now? What are the Republicans saying? Why are we doing this? Because you'll sometimes hear, well, you guys let the government stay open in March. The world is a totally different place now. I have now seen, as an individual who's one of the most bipartisan members of Congress, I have seen the administration go back on its word. I've seen promises broken over and over and over again. And I see the cliff that we're heading off. So I really want to find a way to negotiate. But right now I've been invited to no rooms and no tables to negotiate in. And so that's where we are. I certainly hope that we will be in a better place. What happens in DC doesn't stay in DC is the problem. It ends up hanging out with us here in Harrisburg and here in our community. The last slide says that 75% of the CDC's budget goes to our states. That means that if we drop the CDC's budget, and you've been watching that, then we don't get the money, and then we become less healthy, or we find the money. We know we don't have that. 80% of the Department of Transportation budgets goes to the states and to local government. If we cut off all of the transportation and infrastructure bill that we just passed a year, actually 2 years ago now, then we end up with no bridge and tunnel, in New York. And then we all know that we want to have that in New York. Mikey Sherrill's one of my closest friends, and she fought really, really hard for that bridge and that tunnel. And then, of course, state legislatures were going to have to make some hard choices. So that concludes our presentation part. We're now going to transition into kind of the local view, and I'm going to invite all of our guests to this stage and introduce each of them. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because everything is local, right? All politics are local. And I want you to hear from the folks who are sitting here in our community while I'm sitting down in Washington about how each of these kinds of aspects of this Republican budget bill has affected or will affect our community. We have Tamara Acuna, am I saying that right? Acuna, Assistant Director of Student Services at Chester County Intermediate Unit, right here. She's hosting us. Dr. Jonathan Arend, Medical Director for Primary Care and Population Health at Mainline Health. And Lucine, who's the president and CEO of the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance. So she'll be able to give us a business perspective on this. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to hang out. I think I'm going to grab this mic. I have a couple of questions for each of them. We're going to take the next 20 or so minutes to ask each one of these questions, and then we will transition to your questions as well. So please join us on the stage. Do you want to ask the questions, or do you want me to ask? I'm asking. Welcome. Okay. My first question is for you. Again, you are the Assistant Director of Student Services here at the Chester County Intermediate Unit. There are elements and impacts of the budget that are laid out in the big, beautiful bill that's also called HR 1. Can you hear me still? Okay, for preschoolers, and they go from preschoolers all the way to college students. So if you can put your thinking cap on and think about the population of K through 12 students, what's the one thing that families of K through 12 students should know about the impact of this bill on public education?
Thank you for asking the question and for having us here to talk about this tonight. And thank you everyone for being committed to listening to us. So I think the most important thing for families to know about this bill is that it proposes a huge restructuring of how public education is funded and governed. You can't hear me. I'm sorry. Thank you. In particular, what this looks like is an increase in things like vouchers and educational savings accounts for students and families that takes public funds out of our typical schools and puts them into things like private school tuition and homeschooling opportunities for families. And while that does sound like a benefit to families to have that kind of choice in their education, it also takes funding away from where the majority of our students get their education in a public school. On a local level, what that looks like for us is a huge decrease in the services that we can provide in migrant education, 21st century community learning centers, to our housing insecure families, and to our English language learners. So here in Chester County, we serve more than 300 migrant students. Those are students who, because their family has worked in agriculture and moved within the last 3 years, are identified as needing additional academic supports. We provide those students with specific tutoring based on their outcomes in school. And we work with the families to ensure that the families know how to access education and be part of their child's school community. Without those funding streams, those students are going to be more disconnected and fall further behind in their academic content. Similarly, in 21st century community learning centers, we serve more than 400 Chester County students and an additional 100 students in Reading who benefit from coming to our programs after school every day. They receive academic tutoring, they receive career readiness skills. We work with their families on being engaged in the school system, and we work one-on-one with mentors to make sure that students have all of the supports that they need, and we feed them every day before they go home. And without that funding, those students will lose that type of service, and that's going to have a direct impact on parents' ability to work, because if we don't have a safe place for students to go after school, our ability to be in the workforce is significantly decreased. For our students who are housing insecure or our families who are entirely homeless, they are currently protected by the McKinney-Vento Act. That act guarantees that our students have access to transportation to their school district that they were displaced from. It also guarantees that they get to stay in the school where they were and continue to be served by the teachers in the community they lived in, and provides them with funding to have equitable access to school while they're there. This bill does reduce both the funding to that program and the oversight of those rules, which is going to create even further educational instability and housing instability for families that are already in a crisis situation. And then the final group of students that we are really looking at a significant impact on is our English language learners. This bill really does take away the majority of our English language supports, but it is not going to change the reality that these students need to learn English while they're also mastering academic content at the grade level of their age. So what that's going to look like in a classroom is teachers who have less resources to support students who still need an additional level of support. So that's going to impact everyone's student, whether or not the student has English language needs, because the teacher is going to need to spend more time making sure those students who can't speak English at the same level as their peers have the same access to the academic content. So from our perspective, here at the intermediate unit, we really believe that this is going to have a huge impact on the housing values, the outcomes that are happening in schools, and our community engagement in our school systems. And I think it's really important that when families are thinking about the impact of the Big Beautiful Bill, we recognize that the impacts are going to go far beyond just what our students are learning in school, and also affect our community on a much broader scale.
That's a
Kristen.
really good summary, and definitely a lot more depth than I would have been capable of mustering. Thank you very much for giving us that information. The Dr. Jonathan Arend here, our medical director for patient care and population health at Mainline Health. Obviously, health has been a big part of the conversation that we've had here today. As an internal medicine physician, what are the provisions in this bill that you are most concerned about? Is there anything in the bill that you are thinking optimistically about or through a positive lens?
Hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Probably really close, I think, is making it.
There we go. All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate your comments about purple, because what's really important to keep in mind, for me is that, I mean, I have my politics like we all do, But when I'm in the exam room with patients, none of that. The only thing that matters to me is what's good for my patients, you know? And so we have discussions about that. So when I look at this legislation, I have sort of two lenses. So you mentioned medical director. So as medical director for primary care, I'm involved in all the primary care practices that are employed by Mainline Health from right here in Downingtown all the way to Lankenau, where I see patients. And so I think about the impacts on an organizational level for all these folks, you know, hundreds of thousands of patients. But I also, again, think about it as a doctor, a primary care doctor, and how these provisions may impact my patients, you know, the people that I see every day and have relationships with. And I will say that I'm deeply concerned. I'm deeply concerned about this. I've never been so afraid for what might happen to my patients. So there are provisions in this legislation that, from my understanding, end up cutting healthcare spending for Medicare, Medicaid, and Affordable Care Act on the exchanges by roughly $1 trillion. And so those cuts in combination with administrative restrictions like having to document work hours every month, having to re-enroll or prove eligibility every 6 months, is expected to result in about 14 million people losing insurance. And that, you know, that affects me certainly personally. So that's sort of, you know, nationally, at the local level, as far as, you know, Mainline Health, for example, you know, we're already seeing Medicaid being woefully underfunded. Currently, we receive, as when we're taking care of patients every day, we get 49 cents on every dollar that we spend caring for patients with Medicaid. 70% of the bills that we send to Medicaid programs are denied or delayed, further, you know, exacerbating, revenue strain. And we end up having to pay extra people to, you know, deal with these claims and you know, appeal them and whatnot. So the situation currently is unsustainable, and we're already in really, really bad shape. So what we're, you know, looking at ahead is really scary. I wasn't living in this state when the Affordable Care Act Medicaid expansion took place. I'm sure it was a pretty dire situation before, I think, 2015. I did my medical school in New Orleans, from New Orleans, years before the Affordable Care Act. And like many of the southeastern states, the Medicaid programs down there were, in many cases still are, sort of non-existent for most adults. And so when I was, you know, in early training in medical school, I assumed that if you were poor in this country, you didn't have health insurance, because that was the reality there. And, you know, quite frankly, the healthcare situation in Louisiana at that time, before the expansion of Medicaid, was horrifying. You know, I remember working in the emergency room at Charity Hospital, and a woman came into the emergency room, and she had a baseball-sized mass that had broken through the skin of one of her breasts. She had no health insurance because she was poor. She had no regular primary care, and she had developed metastatic breast cancer. A group of doctors and I actually, and one of them is in the audience actually, went to rural Ghana earlier this year in the spring to do some medical work, and remote village in West Africa. The healthcare situation there is pretty dire, pretty extreme poverty. It's not that different than what I saw taking care of patients who were poor in Louisiana before the expansion of Medicaid. I don't want to go back to that. It's horrifying. At Mainline Health, I see patients at Lincoln, as I mentioned. I take care of a lot of patients that that have Medicaid, and I keep talking about Medicaid because out of all of the provisions, my perception is that the impact from a healthcare standpoint is going to be mostly felt or most felt by patients with Medicaid. These folks are a lot of them are sick. A lot of chronic diseases, uncontrolled, diabetes, heart disease. They need to see a lot of doctors, have a lot of appointments. They're taking a lot of medications. If some of these folks lost health insurance, it would be catastrophic. So that's, these are my concerns. And, if this plays out as it looks like it will, this situation is only going to be exacerbated. So we're talking about a population of folks that are already suffering the consequences of severe inequities in healthcare. Even at Mainline Health, we do a lot. I'm very proud of what we do in terms of really trying to level the playing field. You're a patient at Mainline Health, no matter what your background, income, you're treated. You're treated as I would a family member. I'm very proud of that. Certainly just, really concerned that that level of care is not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be possible if these cuts, play out. So I think, and I guess my point was even at Mainline Mainline Health with all the focus that we do have on equity and inclusion and providing the same level of care to everyone, our patients at Mainline Health that have Medicaid are still suffering disproportionately. Less screenings for preventive health, cancer screenings, things like that. Diabetes is more poorly controlled. These folks are winding up in the emergency room more often, in the hospitals more often, and that's just going to get worse. So that's my concern. As far as positive things, you mentioned the family and I think medical leave, so that's good. But other than that, it's very difficult for me to be optimistic about what I see, in this legislation. If there's anything that gives me hope, my understanding is that the more people understand what's actually in the legislation, the more people come together and unite over the fact that this is not the way we need to go. And so, as I mentioned, when I'm in the exam room, I'm not blue or red. I'm just taking care of patients. And so my hope is that we as a group of people can come together, take those hats off and just work and fight for, what all people deserve.
No, and I really appreciate your insight and your life experience and obviously incredibly eloquent explanation of what the stakes are. And this is why the battle lines have been drawn on this issue, because this is really life and death, and I think that that's why you're seeing an unusual clash. As I think I mentioned, I spoke to a guy that has served for more than 30 years a couple days ago, and he said, this is totally different. This is not like any other, environment that we've been in, because we were actually traveling with 3 Democrats and 1 Republican, and we were having this conversation, and my Republican colleague said, I just don't understand. Why can't you just vote for this? And we were trying to articulate that this just was so different, that this isn't just sort of let it kick the can down the road for another 3 weeks. This is really different. So thank you for articulating that. And last but not least, Lucine Zahelnik. She's the president and CEO from the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance. And I know that some of you all made the trip from Reading, and I appreciate that. We've had a lot of conversations, Lucine and I, over the years, and some very, very recently. And they were specifically about business, of course. But right now, a lot of the conversation is about tariffs and what is going on with tariffs and why President Trump's tariffs have been difficult and troubling for business. And I guess I would ask you to sort of share your experience with with the businesses that you support. Can't good businesses just pivot? Can't they just change? Can't they just make it work for themselves?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Hello. You can use my.
Pass. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Houlahan, for hosting this town hall, for including GRCA, or the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance, as a trusted voice for Greater Reading, but also for your district. And, it's important to note that, GRCA, we serve as the frontline advocate for our business and our community. And that's 900, give or so, members, businesses that you're asking me about. We're the bridge. We're the bridge between the business, the community, and the government. So it's a very important role. We're ensuring that the challenges that our businesses are facing are heard. So you're going to see me look down, because what I did is I asked for their words and their voices, which some of them still are not willing to share out of fear. And so some were brave enough to have me speak to them by name and by business, and some asked to be anonymous. And that just, shows the climate and the high emotional toil that people are experiencing in our business community, and the challenges. And, we're working to advance business-friendly solutions, and that's amongst the regulatory, legislative, and workforce issues. So hopefully I will make talking about business fun for you, because it is really important. The perspectives that I'm sharing is across a diverse membership that I talked about earlier. So I have, input from manufacturing, agriculture, education, construction, even retail. And we're representing global companies that are headquartered in our district, but also entrepreneurial and family-owned businesses. And they are the foundation of our community. So as I start with our key member perspectives that they willingly shared with me, we'll start with education and construction. So developers right now, I hope most of you know, are talking about our downtown Reading. We've been fortunate enough to have a CRIZ, or a City Revitalization Improvement Zone. We're talking about areas that are targeted for growth in housing and incentives, but they're hesitant. They're hesitant to build downtown. And why is that? And how's it related to our tariffs and our taxes? Because tariffs have dramatically raised construction costs. So bidding out projects have become very difficult. Developers do not want to build higher than a certain level, because then that development process and the materials are more costly. An example very specifically, Albright College spoke to me earlier. The material cost for one project that they have has jumped by $500,000 due to tariffs. That's significant. And Albright College, if some of you may or may not know, they've been in the trenches. They've been trying to move forward to sustain as one of our higher ed institutions in our community. So for them to have something like this put on the table that they didn't anticipate is substantial. So, they say members generally, and you'll hear this theme, they understand some of the intents proposed by the tariffs, but these sudden shifts, this uncertainty that we've talked about, the volatility we've talked long about, are making planning nearly impossible. So when we're talking about our businesses and business planning, some of them are operating by the seat of their pants, right? They don't have they haven't mapped out a business plan, but those like institutions, our eds and our meds, they've got plans, and this planning process is being challenged. Local manufacturing and distribution. This is very interesting to me. One of our manufacturers, who asked not to be named, but you may be able to tell who they are by the story, they saw tariff costs exceed their entire payroll for 60 employees. So tariffs costs are exceeding their entire payroll. Tariffs eliminated 15% of their top line revenue. And this is completely wiping out their net profit. Okay? And they said, share these three things. Please share these three things when you talk about it this evening. So these are the three realities they're facing. The direct costs. So the tariffs are paid directly to the US Treasury by the business, and it's draining their cash flow. There's a lack of US supply. So the critical components, this is number 2, are not available domestically, and it's leaving these businesses stuck. Number 3, the global competition. This is really interesting because we're hearing about traveling, your experiences globally. The foreign factories that are distributing directly into the US. They're doing it through channels like Amazon. And I don't want to Amazon shame anybody, right? Because we all use Amazon. But it's undercutting our local businesses and the jobs. So what do we do? I don't want to belabor healthcare too much because I think you gave an excellent perspective. But there was somebody by name, Weidenhammer, which is IT. And he as an employer in our community is facing 17% increases in healthcare costs for 2026. So what that means in numbers is an additional $271,000 annually. And that's going to come out of their directly out of their bottom line. Right? So these are people who are working, and this is where these tariffs are impacting them. So, here we see members with federal healthcare subsidies preserved for some, while most small and mid-sized employers are absorbing these steep, unsustainable increases, but that's not sustainable, right? Especially if it's coming out of their bottom line. Human resources and workforce, we had some input there, again, unnamed. These tariffs on again, off again nature creates instability. That really is a theme. The unpredictability leads to delayed investments. We've talked about that. Hiring freezes, layoffs. Okay, the shutdown is, you've pointed that out earlier. And stable, predictable trade policy is essential for businesses to plan and grow and invest with confidence. They just don't have that right now. Agriculture, which you did talk about, so it's not mushrooms for us in Berks County, although we have some good ones. I want to talk to you this evening about soybeans, right? So, Berks County, we boast about 88,000 acres of preserved farmland, and soybeans account for 13% of the sales. But what we've heard in terms of some pushback and retaliation, specifically with China, they're signaling that they want to stop buying American soybeans. And local farmers will face devastating economic consequences if that happens. Okay, so we've talked about tariffs. Tariffs are a tax. I don't think I need to continue to say that, but they are a tax. These taxes are being paid by American businesses and consumers, not the foreign governments. They're feeling it here. And the intended goals, that were put forth, protecting domestic industry, raising revenue, providing leverage, is not what I'm hearing is being realized in our business community. What I'm hearing is tariffs are driving economic strain, higher consumer costs, eroding profit margins. You talked about the price on consumers. I went out to breakfast with my family, my husband, my son, and my brother-in-law. We do take him out for breakfast. And it's breakfast. It wasn't a chain. It was a mom and pop restaurant. This was on Sunday. So this is very recent. We had pancakes, eggs, omelets, some kind of never-ending bowl of food. Our bill, can you guess? What did that breakfast cost?
I don't know.
$102. Yeah. And, when we look at those three line, your graphs are excellent. It's affecting all of us. We can't go out for breakfast. And I have a very, very good job. I'm lucky, right? So what do we do? What do we see? What do we keep going? Workforce impacts are critically reduced hiring and investment. We're seeing that increased caution amongst employers with this unpredictability. And the timing issue that you spoke to is what I hear also from our business community. So from when these, tariffs were rolled out and then rolled out again, pulled back, rolled out, and when the timing falls into how it's going to affect their bottom line and how it's going to fall into fourth quarter, that's significant. There's pros and cons, and I want to stay on time. But, we just really want to continue to amplify our members' voices.
I am so grateful for your insight because we have had these conversations, and you're right. A lot of our businesses don't want to poke their head up. They don't want to be named. They are afraid that there'll be retribution or that this will hurt them. And that makes it really hard to represent the businesses if they can't talk about the pains that they're going through. And that has been a struggle. So I'm really, really glad to hear these, not just, impersonal anecdotes, but specific ones, because they are consistent with what we hear in Chester County and in Berks County and across the country too. And I heard about soybeans when I was in China, and the fact that the Chinese are not buying them. And I actually met with a soybean farmer who's not planting soybeans this time because of his fear. He had to figure out what other crop to move to. Well, this has been really awesome to have education and health and business speak to us about the big, beautiful bill, the Republican budget process. I appreciate it very much. If it's okay, I'd love to ask you guys to stay in case one or two of these questions might be better for you to answer than for me. I'm going to invite Chris to the stage right now, who I hope has collected some of our questions and might be able to ask them either of me or of you all. And thank you very much for your amazing insight into our community.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out. I'm Chris Sallow. I'm the CEO of the Chester County United Way. And Congresswoman, I appreciate you including us in the conversation. Our focus areas are education, health, and financial stability. So the topic tonight was perfectly aligned. Actually, the first question is for the doctor. Do you expect a doctor shortage due to the new education loan limit of $50,000 for postgraduate in the big, beautiful bill?
I think, can you hear me okay? Don't have all the details of the policy, but what I can tell you is that we have a pretty critical primary care shortage in this country. I don't think I need to tell anybody that. Probably many of you have spent a lot of time trying to maybe find a new primary care provider and come up against some pretty significant barriers. I hear this every day at Mainline Health. People trying to get into I saw a patient today, actually. She said she was waiting 6 months, and that's good relative to some what some people are dealing with. So I think whatever we can do to foster more folks going into primary care. Sort of obviously I'm biased, but this is the reality. And to expand that access to patients that so we can provide the care to everyone in our community, and particularly folks coming from Crozier Hospital system, for example, has been a particular strain for that community, and so whatever we can do to increase and enhance that workforce.
I can give some detail.
Yes, thank you.
From a federal perspective, this bill, some detail on it. There are caps. And so as an example, for graduate students, there are new caps placed on federal loans for graduate and professional degree students. The bill limits most graduate students to $20,500 a year and a $100,000 lifetime cap, with higher limits, and I don't know what they are, for professional degrees. If you have an advanced degree, you know that this borrowing limit is not realistic for the amount of money that you're going to need to spend. For parents, if you're a parent and want to have a loan, it caps the loan that you can take at $65,000 per student. And if you're a student, it also caps the student loans as well. You can no longer borrow the full cost of your education. It prohibits some people from actually attending college because of that. The other thing that I would say is I too really worry about the supply of doctors and those who take care of us, and also people who are of service. And I think that there's some good initiatives, good bills that are bipartisan that we still haven't managed to push through that allow people who are of service to us, like doctors, to have loan forgiveness after a certain amount of time, having worked in a certain sector. And I think those are the kinds of things that make sense to have loan forgiveness or reduced interest rates or those kinds of things, because that's what our economy demands. I was in ROTC years ago, 35 years ago, and my degree, it was specified I had to major in industrial engineering in order to have a scholarship, because that's what the military needed at the time. And so similarly, we need a process where we have a demand signal that's pulling people through who are healthcare people. And over to Chris for another question.
On that same topic, are you concerned, there's a question about the $100,000 H-1B visa charge and how that could decimate healthcare as well as medical school and medical careers?
Doctor, I don't know if you have an opinion on that. I certainly do.
Go for it.
I don't think we should be buying our way into our country. And I think that we have lots and lots of very capable ways of managing our talent coming in. My father was a refugee. He came in as a 4-year-old with no skills. And he has created an amazing life for my family, my mom and my brother and I. but he had nothing to offer. We also have people who come to this country who have a lot to offer, some of them in the medical fields. We need to have a thoughtful immigration plan and policy that allows for all of that, but I don't think the way to do it is with golden tickets and lottery, buying your way into the country. I think that's an atrocious way to lead with not lead with our values.
Doctor, anything to add to that?
No, I think that covers it.
This next one's related to technology and data. There's a couple questions regarding the Doge access to a lot of people's data and the concerns about the Social Security data that was breached, as well as phishing scams and all the increase in data security. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that's some of your background is.
Yeah, it was one of those things that actually really terrified me when Doge kind of first got cooking in the early January timeframe. My background is in systems engineering, and I did spend a lot of time in industry building data systems for different kinds of businesses. And so I have some good familiarity with what kind of systems we're talking about when we go into Social Security or when we have access to health records or when we can combine them, and what the power of AI is to run over all of that and to accumulate all that. I think, again, my colleagues, and this is both sides of the aisle, really didn't understand kind of what was going on in this area. And I tried really hard to scare the hell out of them with this. And I tried to explain to them that you were giving the keys to the kingdom to a bunch of people who would have, into time immemorial, access to every bit of information that whatever organization Doge was coming into was gathering, and they were going to be able to connect that information into large masses of information to be able to be used for whatever nefarious purpose they could come up with. My colleagues in Congress, very few of them have tech backgrounds. Only about 24, 25 members of Congress of the 435 of us have tech backgrounds. And so when I was explaining it to these guys, they were like, and they're mostly guys, they were like, well, but it's read only. And I was like, dude, it is not read only. You're all, I didn't even have the words to explain, like, once they have the technology, once they have the data, they always have the data, even if they walk out the door the next day or we kick them out the door. So I am very, very worried about the data that is now no longer ours and its power in the hands of the people who have it. I'm not sure what to do about it. I tried pretty hard while that was all going on to try to get my colleagues to try to pass laws and to kick the Doge people out, and that didn't help. Another thing that I'm worried about, you mentioned scam stuff. I told you I was in China. I also was in Cambodia last week, and Cambodia, actually something like 30 to 60% of their GDP at this point in time is scams. It's literally called Scambodia at this point in time. If you Google it, what they have set up is what used to be a gambling industry has now been replaced by a scam industry. It is literally a business center where people are coming into town, working, in some cases being trafficked to work there, and then they're raising revenue for the government, and it's kind of leaked into the government's corruption, to be honest about it. But yes, this is another instance of, we held a town hall that had to do with trying to keep yourself safe from scams. If you have an opportunity, you can take a look at that to try to understand what you can do to prevent that. Basically, don't believe anything you hear. Basically, don't click on any email. Basically, if somebody calls you and tells you that they're in trouble, know that they could be mimicking their voice, literally. Your voice, if you look on my website, my Wikipedia, it has a piece of my voice on it right now, which terrifies me for lots of different reasons. But yeah, we have a lot of work to do on data integrity, data accessibility, and unfortunately, we're not getting out of our own way. We're spending time on this stuff instead of working together on that.
There were a lot of questions and concerns about people with disabilities and the Big Beautiful Bill's impact on disability services and almost incentives for states to cut back on programs to support. Can you speak to that at all? And is there anything that can be done to prevent states from cutting services to people with
So
disabilities?
in some ways, the good news is that we're a federated government and that there are states' laws still that are protecting us in different ways. And I think Pennsylvania does a decent job. We're probably middling, maybe top three quarters in terms of how we protect people with disabilities compared to other states. So we do have a little bit of a backstop in Pennsylvania that other places, Louisiana as an example, probably doesn't have. So that's the good news. The bad news is this is another frustration in Congress. When it became clear that the big beautiful bill was going to happen, whether I liked it or not, I tried to put in amendments. Remember Schoolhouse Rock and, I'm just a bill? You put in an amendment and it's supposed to be like voted on and debated and all those kinds of things. The reality is that doesn't happen. You put in an amendment, and if you're the party in the minority, your amendment is denied basically almost every time. And your amendment never gets to see the light of day or debate or voted on. So one of my amendments on the big beautiful bill was to make sure that people like my family member were excluded from the requirement to apply every 6 months, so that people like him could be safe and could not have to worry about that. It was ruled out of order, which means it is not germane to the bill, which of course it is, and it was not allowed a vote nor any sort of debate. And so I'll keep working on that. And again, I think you're right. As people start learning about these things and it starts affecting them and their family members, maybe we'll get some changes.
I'm going to say in the healthcare space, because there were a lot of questions as it relates to healthcare. One in particular had to do with all of the research cuts that have taken place and continue to take place. Can you speak to some of those cuts and the potential impacts they're going to have both now and in the future? And how can people engage to try to prevent some of those cuts from going deeper?
So I am very worried about this. And not only am I worried about it because of the research that is no longer going to be happening and is starting and stopping, because you can't do that. You can't start and stop. But I'm also worried about this from a talent perspective, because a lot of people are taking their talent and going somewhere else. And I've specifically heard about people going to Singapore, individual people going to Canada, people going to Europe, people going to China. And they're taking their talents on the road. And that's really, really worrisome. So even if we were to turn the spigots back on in funding, we've lost some of the talent. And also speaking to the young talent, the folks who are doing their master's work or their PhD work, they're also taking their talents on the road because they don't see a path for them to be able to continue to be educated here and to work here and to research here. This is a huge punchline, I guess, laughing opportunity for our opponents in this global world. They are really, really excited about the opportunities, and the Canadians are too. The people who are not our enemies are pretty excited about it as well. Do you want to talk about it on the NIH stuff or anything?
I mean, I just have a personal anecdote. My sister is actually a gynecologic cancer doctor and researcher in Birmingham. She's much smarter than I am. And she runs a lab. And, we talk a lot because me being on the front lines and trying to prevent, gynecologic cancers, she is, or so she tells me, literally in the process, or was, of developing a treatment for ovarian cancer that apparently would become the standard of care. So she's doing real stuff. And 90% or something like that of her funding is from NIH. And I've been asking her, what's happening with your life's work, basically. And it's stopped. And so it just doesn't make sense to me. We should be the world's leaders in this type of innovation and research, and I just don't understand. It's not logical. So whether you're a frontline primary care doctor like I am, or leading the charge to develop cures and treatments for the stuff that I'm trying to prevent, we're just going backwards, and it's really, really scary.
It is kind of confusing. I just don't get it. It just seems penny wise and pound foolish. And the other theory that I heard somebody in Washington talking to me about. It was that they wanted to move the NIH to a red place. And because it's not in a red place right now, like that's ridiculous too. So who knows what's really happening, but that's another theory that's buzzing around Washington.
Well, it's just, it's so frustrating to me that there's so much going on in Washington that is frankly just anti-science. I don't understand it. I mean, we had our patients calling off the hook a couple of weeks ago, wanting prescriptions for COVID vaccines because the new recommendations are, well, I don't know if it's the right thing. You need to discuss the risks and benefits, and which we do with anything. But these restrictions on proven treatments that save thousands and thousands of lives, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Chris, may we have another question, please?
Yeah, I'm trying not to stay in one space, but there was a lot of healthcare questions. But here's one there were several questions that I'll kind of paraphrase. There's concern about obviously the lack or the abdication of responsibility for the budget that seems to have happened in Congress, and so much power has been consolidated. How do you see that getting fixed? There were questions related due to gerrymandering and is it fixable? But right now, Congress has the power of the purse, and they're not
doing it.
They're not doing it, and so there's a lot of questions about your thoughts on that.
I don't. Ma'am, how are you? Hello, hello. I don't know how to talk about this constructively, but I was not involved in government until I was elected the first time, and I didn't really totally appreciate the process the way that I hopefully appreciate it now. But there is a committee that's called the Appropriations Committee, and it's in the House and it's in the Senate, and their job is there's 12 different appropriations bills, and they're each part of the budget. There's sort of education bill, and then there's defense, and there's foreign affairs, and that sort of thing. And the appropriators are like gods. To be on the Appropriations Committee is to have made it. What you don't know about Congress is when you get there, you have to campaign for what committee you're going to be on. I am not an appropriator by design. I don't want to be one. But what's interesting about being an appropriator is that those have been considered some of the most powerful positions in Washington. And increasingly, they are less and less relevant because they've lost power, they've lost relevance, and they've, in many cases, given it up. They've given it up to the executive branch. They've abdicated their responsibility, and they've told, in this case, in this administration, they've told the executive branch, you do all the things you've planned on doing, and we'll basically step back. And so even though the appropriators are doing their jobs, and they've now passed, I think, 3 or 4 of the 12 bills that they were supposed to have passed before September, we still don't have the process working the way it's supposed to work so that I can eventually vote on one of those 12 bills. I think I voted on 2 or 3 of them so far for last year. So we're that far behind. So this is why it's really hard for Americans and me to understand, what's going on in the budgetary process. And this is why we spent all of last year, the entire fiscal year, on what's called a continuing resolution. We had no budget for an entire year. We just continued to fund it the way that we had been funding it. So this is another reason why I'm kind of like, I'm done with this. I'm not going to vote for the continuing resolution. I know that I need to be realistic and reasonable with myself. At some point, something's got to give, right? But at this point, I need to figure out how to draw the line to make sure that I'm representing our community as best as I can. So that was about appropriations and funding and stuff. Yeah, I'm devastated because it doesn't work the way that the cartoon said it did.
Yeah.
The so-called Israel, which is like a genocidal state. Why don't you tell them that our problem is the $17 billion that we sent just for the war? Just for the war. Why don't you share that with the customer? You think that all those 4 billion, if you had it for those years, And the 17 billions that we sent only for the genocide, will that be like supporting all our problems?
Ma'am,
No.
no, I really appreciate your question, and at least let me answer it. Ma'am, could you let me answer the question?
Is that so? Is it cowardness or the thousands and thousands that you get from
Ma-
back? So be honest and answer. Is it because you're taking money from AIPAC? That's why they're not.
I think if you, excuse me, ma'am, could you let me answer the question? Ma'am, if I could answer,
I had her question right here for the record.
thank you for your question. And I know that you and I work really hard to see eye to eye with one another on this issue. And I work really hard to try to do the best I can for our community on this issue. Absolutely, what's happening to the Palestinian people is atrocious. And absolutely, we need peace. And absolutely, I'm hopeful that the peace deal that President Trump and Netanyahu are looking at with Hamas is a possibility. And I will tell you, ma'am, that I actually had a meeting with King Abdullah about a year and a half ago. And basically, his peace plan a year and a half ago is what they're looking at right now. I will tell you, in my job, I don't get to make war and peace. I don't get to. And I appreciate your concern and worry, and I am worried too. And I absolutely have told you in the past as well that what's happening right now is a war crime. I and I have, and ma'am, I think I've answered your question. The second part of your question had to do with contributions, which I am deeply offended by. I am a very, very, very honest person, and I am not bought by anybody. And I appreciate that you worry about that for me, but you can guarantee that I am very, very firm in my morals and my values, and I am not bought by anyone. And I appreciate your questions, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move on just because all of the questions are important and we only have less than 5 minutes left. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move on. It's very important, and I'm sure the Congresswoman will continue the conversation with you and continue her best efforts. As it relates to, there was quite a few questions about the ICE buildup and immigration, and particularly kind of some comments that were made this past week about sending the military into cities for training.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit into how large this force has become and how aggressive?
That's actually one of the things that we chose not to talk about the big, beautiful bill, which we probably should have included, is there's a big slug of money in that bill to increase border security, border training, border agents, ICE in general. And I believe that when you saw in the early days of the administration, kind of the first several months, and you saw it happening in Los Angeles, amongst other places, and mostly blue states, mostly kind of more vulnerable places, larger cities, you will now start seeing more and more in places like ours because the funding has been increased, because the number of people who can be hired is being increased, and because we're moving people like military JAGs. Military JAGs are the lawyers for the military. We're moving them to be JAGs and ICE. You know, those kinds of things are outrageous. They're absolutely outrageous. And so I do, there's a lot of times people in our community who say, why don't you do more? Why don't you throw yourself in front of in a bus? Why don't you get yourself shot? Why don't you lock yourself to a cage and protest in this way? Why aren't you doing more? And what I will say is I do everything I can to use the personality and gifts that I have to work on the things that I think I can work on. And this is one. And what's going on with our military is absolutely unbelievably wrong. What's going on with the fact that we're deploying our military to our cities is literally not the way the Constitution is written. It's literally unlawful, in my opinion. Again, a number of us Democrats tried to put amendments into the National Defense Authorization Act to make it clear that our military cannot go into cities like this. Those amendments were also ruled not germane, and they were also not allowed a vote, and they were also not allowed any sort of debate. And so
every time I do something like that and try to use my words and try to insert myself in the ways that I am being hired to do, unfortunately, it's seen as being political. It is not political. Our military should not be used against our citizenry.
Thank you, and thank you for your service.
Thanks.
We are close to the end. I wanted to remind you, there are a lot of really great questions here, and if you put your contact information, the staff will follow up with your questions so that they are answered.
And specifically, we get to you within 2 business days, and today's Thursday, so probably early next week will be the latest that you get a call from us. And a reminder, every one of my staff, including myself, are currently working for no pay. So please make sure you're patient with them when they give you a call back.
Thank you for your grace in letting me figure this out. I tried to organize them the best we could get to so many topics, but I'm going to reserve the last question for myself, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of my favorite quotes is, "I'm not an optimist, I'm a prisoner of hope." So if we could end I'd like to know in the craziness that you deal with every day, what are you still hopeful about?
What? Oh, yes. Sue says she'd like to hear from everybody because she knows how I'm going to answer this question. I am an Eeyore. I've told people this before. I am not the Winnie the Pooh or the Tigger or any of those people. I am kind of a pessimist. But that's why I'm in this job, because I really think it is worth fighting for this. And even though it's hard and it's uncomfortable, I think it's worth trying to do my very best. And so I'm optimistic because there are still good people in Washington. Truly, there are. They're hard to find and they're very quiet, but they are there. So I'm optimistic that we can pull out of this because we have in the past. And I'll turn it over to you.
Is my mic working now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think the thing that brings me the biggest hope is why I show up at work every day. So I'm lucky enough to get to come to work and work with kids and teachers every single day. And I think the level of hope that brings me in terms of seeing that despite the challenges that I think we all hear about regularly in education at this point, there are teachers who are showing up for every one of our kids every day, making sure that kids have the best opportunities they possibly can. I'm proud to work for an organization that prioritizes that. I'm proud to work alongside people who see that value as well.
Doctor?
Yeah, well, I would just say, kind of to echo some of the sentiments I've expressed before, I am deeply privileged to have the ability to sit in an exam room and connect with people in a way that a lot of people are not able to do. It's really getting to know people on a very personal level. And again, to me, Democrats, Republicans, you name it, none of that matters in the exam room. And I really am able to connect with people and see people for who they are, and they see me.
Telling us something.
Yes? No? Third time's a charm? Yes. Okay. And once again, I think that, once we have conversations about healthcare, and when it refocuses on, real problems with real people and real solutions, I can see how we're all really on the same page fundamentally, with a lot of these basic questions. And so I see hope in just people. I don't know about politicians, a lot of politicians these days, but I see hope in just regular folk coming together and stopping to think and realizing what's at stake and what we need to all do to work together, to make things better for all of us.
I would say that politicians are people too, right? So thank you for what you do, and I am also an optimist. I think for me, working with our business community, one of the gifts, kind of saying what you said, is economic development doesn't have a party, right? And a lot of times, economic development and working with these businesses, it's realizing the American dream. And so, as a business owner, as a family business owner, seeing generations of business owners, having the ability to do that, to pivot, to find your passion and your purpose, to be able to do that and navigate that around and feed each other, right? And provide the things that we all need as a community, to continue to operate our basic needs. That business community is resilient, and to see the way people, including ourselves, have pivoted, who won't take no for an answer, who will work more than 24 hours in one day, because they know and feel intrinsically that that's the right thing to do. That gives me incredible hope.
I'm going to ask Chrissy to close it out. I want to thank the panelists for their time and their expertise, but I also want to thank all of you for giving up your evening. The most important place for you to be tonight is here in a room, talking and listening to each other, and that's how we're going to solve our community's problems. So thank you all, and thank for everybody that tuned in online. Chrissy, could you close us out?
Yes, and thank you. And thank you, Chris, and thank you to the panelists. I have actually two more slides to show you, and my concluding remarks I'm not going to say because I think they're exactly what Chris just said. If there's one thing I have optimism about, it's that there's a lot of communities in this country right now that don't have town halls. They can't do it. They can't speak civilly to one another. And this is a community that can still do it. Even though I know that a lot of us don't agree with each other, I know fundamentally that there are Republicans out there, Democrats out there, independents out there. There are people of all kinds of persuasions in this audience. And yet we can still have conversations with each other. And so for that, I am thankful for you. And for that, I am optimistic. I will show the last two slides. So this is one of my new slides. If you don't like what you see, here's what you do, because people are always like, what do I do? And I don't have good answers for that. But if you do like what you see, it's the same answer. So they are. Communicate with your government, which is what you're doing right now. And remember that your government is state, local, and federal, and that we all do different things. Your voice really matters. What you say to me really, really matters. And I listen really hard. Let us know if specific direct impact stories that we can elevate. I'm an engineer, and what I found is that data matters, but stories matter too. And I've also found that in Congress, Republicans largely speak in numbers and data, and Democrats speak in stories. And so I think that people speak in both words. And so I need your stories. I need to talk about you. Contact us if you need help with anything that's federal. And even if it's not federal, we largely can redirect you to somebody else. Support organizations that you know of that work on causes that are important to you. When people are asking, what can I do? I feel hopeless. I feel helpless. Think of the thing that you do, that you like to do, and find a spot to do that in. Next slide. If you don't or do like what you see, it's the same prescription as well. Vote, please. Your vote matters. And it's important that you vote 2 times a year, both in the primaries and in the general. In off years and on years, in election year, in presidential years and in non-presidential years. Please vote, because your vote matters, and it really drives who that person is in the primary, as an example, when you talk about gerrymandering as an example. Follow me on social media. Please sign up for my newsletter. It's important that you please sign up for my newsletter. We work really hard on it. It is very content rich. In fact, I've had people say there's so many words. Can you make fewer words? And no, I will not make fewer words on my newsletter. Remember, approximately 50% of our community, this district and the county, and the country is true, may disagree with you, has a totally different opinion than you might have. And that we're all seeking to be right. It's so funny. People want me to be even-handed and bipartisan as long as I always agree with them. And that makes it hard. And the last point, whether you do or you don't like what you see, please do take care of yourself. Please do take care of other people too. We are in this together, and we will pull out from this together, but only if we communicate with one another. So thank you very much for coming this evening. I very much appreciate you all.
Why do you let me ask him?